Greetings, Taku Faithful. Thank you for joining me again this week. Once again, it's Larry Williams, OAW Commander-in-Chief, and I'm here to bring you all yet again another Legends of Tomorrow episode review right here on Otaku Assemble. Weekly, and finally, I'm back to bring you all the latest in this week's Legends of Tomorrow episode review, and this is my review of Season 1, Episode 15, entitled Destiny. Now, before I jump into this week's episode, I want to briefly go ahead and touch up on last week's episode, given the fact that I missed my review for last week. So, just briefly, my overall thoughts on episode 14, by and large, it was completely superfluous, with the exception of like the last 3 to 5 minutes when the team arrives at the vanishing point. Everything before that, completely throwaway. Why? Because nothing changed. Nothing in the status quo had changed if the team had not just apprehended Savage at the end of episode 13 and then went straight to the vanishing point. Most of what we got in that episode dealt with the whole Kendra-Ray relationship bit, which I already mentioned in previous reviews that I'm not going to touch on that anymore. And the whole old Savage inside of the Clear prison taunting the rest of the team and getting them to turn on each other. Ever since Avengers did that 4 years ago, it seems like everyone's been copying that, and I'm just tired of seeing it, to be honest with you all. Besides, we already got something similar to that when Mick was captured by the team earlier in the season. So once again, completely superfluous, completely throwaway. Like I said, the only thing about episode 14 that is worth mentioning, and that just go ahead and segue into this week's episode, is that when the team arrived at the vanishing point, they found out that the Time Masters were actually in league with Savage. And that was pretty much it. Even the whole subplot with Jax being injured and sent back to 2016, that whole thing, that was just another excuse for them to separate Firestorm. Because remember, in episode 13, Stein went down, and Jax was, Jax had to coach on Ray. So in episode 14, we decided to go ahead and put Jax down, so Stein's by himself. All in all, these are just ways in which the writers are trying to create conflicts through which that Firestorm cannot be present. Because let's face it, guys, at the end of the day, Firestorm is probably the most powerful member of the team. So they keep coming up with new ways to keep Jax and Stein separate so that we don't have Firestorm through most of these conflicts. Why? Because if we had Firestorm, this shit would get wrapped up pretty quickly. So all in all, that's pretty much my thoughts for episode 14. Now on to this week's episode, episode 15, entitled Destiny, picking up where we left off in episode 14, where Rip has pretty much, along with the rest of the team, they have pretty much discovered that the Time Masters have been in leagues with Savage the entire time. Now, that I long suspected that. However, if you all will recall from some of my previous reviews, I mentioned the idea of Savage actually being in control of the Time Masters, and apparently we found out this week that wasn't the case. The Time Masters have decided to cooperate with Savage. They've been working together because apparently there is a Thanagarian invasion that takes place, I think they said, 9 years after the time that we're in now, because I think it's 2175 is when it occurs. And they mentioned that Savage was the only person who could unite the world in a single defense against this alien invasion. And so that's why they've pretty much been cooperating with him this entire time. We also get revealed in this week's episode that not only have they been cooperating with him, but they've actually been orchestrating everything that has occurred in the season so far. And they were the ones who commissioned the deaths of Rip's family. Why? Because they knew Rip reacting in anger, going rogue the way he did, assembling the team and whatnot, and trying to take out Savage throughout history, that they used Rip in order to sort of plant the seeds that would eventually lead to Savage's rise to power in 2166. So one way of looking at it is Savage is only where he is because Rip made certain things happen to ensure that that outcome would present itself. And the Time Masters simply allowed Rip to do it. So, okay, so I want to go ahead and I want to give my thoughts on that real quick. Here's the thing. At the time in which that was revealed, I was real quick to call BS on it. But if you really think about it, it does make sense, especially when you take in consideration, because remember, the death of Rip's family, that was the opening scene of the pilot. And if you all will remember, it happened the exact same way. And there was always that one line that Savage said that always bugged me throughout this entire season. When he told Jonas, he said, "Your father was foolish." That implying that he already had a pre-established history with Rip. And I remember even watching that pilot, the second he said that line, I'm like, what if what if this scene that we're getting takes place? Yes, we know it takes place in the future, but what if that scene is the result of the events that happened throughout the season? So that was already some pretty good foreshadowing, I think, on the writer's part. And then also consider this, the absence of the Time Masters to some degree throughout the course of the season. Like, we know that they've sent people after Rip and his team, but you all will remember from my Magnificent 8 review, they didn't do any, the idea that these hunters and assassins that they're sending after the team, none of them are really formidable enough threats to actually take out the team. So it's sort of that idea, like they've been keeping up appearances and they've been presenting Rip and the rest of the team with these threats because, of course, they would expect some type of resistance, but they haven't done anything that would soundly wipe out the team. Not really. Nothing that Rip and the rest of his team couldn't handle. So it does sort of make sense. Then also take in consideration this, and this I think is the whole linchpin in that whole plot twist. When they introduced and explained what the Oculus was, that it was this sort of this monitor for history, right? Like they could look into the past, they can see the present, everything going on in the present, and they can look into the future, and that's what they used. That was the source of their information, and that's what they used in order to either correct or shape time to their own ends, correct? Well, consider this. That's where Gideon was getting all of her information from, the Oculus. So the Time Masters were simply just feeding information to Gideon and by extension to Rip and the rest of the team so that they could manipulate Rip into acting the way they wanted him to based off of the information he was getting. So that I actually think was done pretty well. And once again, like I said, the reason I think the plot twist works is because there was already enough evidence to suggest that something like that would have been going on in the first place. So that I actually did. That I actually dug. And I also dug how, it wasn't that they were completely under Savage's thumb. No, it really was an equal partnership. Why? Because the second Rip and his team was able to take out the Oculus, they told him straight up, it's like, hey man, we can't help you anymore. Our partnership at this point in time is null and void. We're done. So now I'm really interested in seeing what happens with the finale, because now it's all fair game, right? Now Savage has to operate on his own. He doesn't have the Time Masters backing him anymore. And now Rip and his team actually could influence the time stream more so than they ever could, because now they know they aren't being misinformed, and now they're sort of in full control of the events that happen from this point in time. So all of that I think was done pretty well. And I will even say this, for the most part, I didn't find too many problems with the episode. Mainly, that's probably because there was no Kendra-Ray relationship bullshit in this episode. There wasn't at all, because Kendra and Carter have been abducted by Savage, and the rest of the team, of course, have been fighting the Time Masters. So all of that, I think, worked out pretty well. Now, I will say this, though. I will comment on this. We did get, I guess, what could be considered the first major character death for the team, because remember, Carter came back, and we knew Carter would come back at some point in time. Why? Because he reincarnates. This time around, though, we actually got a death that might stick, and that was Snart. Now, I will go ahead and say this up front. I'm a little disappointed in that because Snart's one of my favorite characters on the show. Snart was one of my favorite characters in the Arrowverse period before I even found out about Legends of Tomorrow because I loved him on Flash. So the idea that Snart might be gone now, I'm a little disappointed in that because I think Wentworth Miller does a fantastic job portraying him, and it seems like the actor really gets into the role. He brings so much energy to it and so much character and so much flavor to it that the idea that character would be gone, yeah, that does kind of bother me to some degree. Then again, that's not to say that he won't come back. I mean, come on, this is an entire show centered around the idea of time travel. And seeing as how many members of the team have had close run-ins and then they ended up coming back anyway, so I'm hoping Snart will come back. But then again, the way in which he went out, if they were going to have a major casualty on the team, I thought that was pretty appropriate, especially since it does sort of end his character arc, which was the whole thing about, am I a villain? Am I a hero? Am I a bad guy? Am I a good guy? You know, that whole thing with him risking himself for the rest of the team, that I thought worked pretty well. Now, I will say this. I do find it funny that the same thing could have very well have been said with Mick, because Mick was the one who got Ray out of the way and threw himself, you know, on the wire, if you will, for his comrade. So I think even if it had been Mick, the effect would have still been the same. But I think with Snart, though, it's more impactful just because Snart was the character sort of questioning his own motives and questioning his own nature throughout the entirety of the series. Whereas with Mick, that only happened within the last few episodes or so. That only happened in the second part of the season. So I think with Snart, it makes more sense. The other thing, this was a huge tease too. The whole Snart-Sara hookup thing, man, in hindsight, I really wish they would have done that. Why? Because that relationship actually would have made a lot more sense than Kendra and Ray. That would have made a lot more sense. Why? Because we're dealing with two characters that are in that sort of moral gray. They are two characters that are constantly questioning what their motives and natures are, trying to figure out if they're good people or bad people. You know, like I think they have more in. Oh, and also consider this. Both of them are killers with codes. Remember that. Sara, she is a killer, but she has a code, being a member of the League of Assassins. Snart, once again, he does kill people to achieve his ends, but he is firmly against collateral damage. If someone doesn't need to be taken out for me to get what I'm after, then I'm not going to do it. So he has a code. So see, that's the other thing too, and that's what makes them morally gray characters. That, I think, is a much more interesting dynamic, hooking those two characters together, than fucking Kendra and Ray. Just saying. And once again, like, Jax finally returns to the team in this episode, and yeah, I do think him going back in time and you know, the scenes with Snart and all, I mean, the scenes with Stein and everything, like, that really did sort of feel like throwaway. But remember, that had to be in the episode because we had to get Jax back with the rest of the team. Otherwise, we were just going to write out the rest of the finale without him. So once again, if they never would have separated Jax and Stein in the first place, there would have been no need for the scenes in this episode. So if you really think about it, it's filler. It's filler. But all in all, like I said, by and large, I think this episode was actually pretty solid. Much better than last week's episode, much better than 14. And like I said, if they would have ended episode 13 with them taking Savage straight to the vanishing point and then having that reveal at the end of that episode, there would have been absolutely no need for episode 14. We could have went straight into this episode. So all in all, that's going to go ahead and wrap up this week's Legends of Tomorrow episode review. I want to thank you all for joining me again this week. In the comments below, leave your thoughts on episode 14. Leave your thoughts on episode 15. Leave your thoughts on anything I mentioned in this review. And then also let me know what you all are expecting. What are some of your expectations and speculations for the season finale next Thursday? If you like this review, please feel free. Thumb it up, share it with other fans of the show and people you think would get a kick out of this review. And if you have yet to do so, subscribe to the OAW YouTube channel. Annotation is above head. And with that being said, this has been Larry Williams, OAW Commander-in-Chief. I'm signing off, and until next time, peace.